Well, the hits just keep coming. Here we go. Here we are, day three, the final day, which is wild, of our conference to restore humanity 2025, the quest for connection. I just want to shout out Chris McNutt here real quick for the map. I don't know if he's not very good at being his own hype man, so I feel like he needs us to up for him in this moment. He made this map and this image from scratch using little, like every tree, every little thing in here had to be built. He put the little map together. You know, it was one of those weekend projects where he had the idea, I'm sure, on a Friday and then worked 40 hours straight to get it done on a Sunday, which is typically how Chris works. But we don't have a whole lot of time left, which is wild to think. This morning, obviously, we've assembled an incredible panel to talk about education in 2025 and beyond. This afternoon, our final workshop with Angela Stockman about pedagogical documentation. HRP will have a short closing event this afternoon to have us come together just for get some closure on this, sign each other's yearbooks and send us back out into the world. And then tonight we'll have a couple of informal events, a lot more low key than what we've had the last couple nights. There was a niche crew in there. There was a core group talking about tabletop RPGs and doing some world building things the other night, which was incredible. Yeah, of course, I want to just bring up here. Chris, could you go to the slide that has like the shout outs and the emergent strategy stuff on it? I think that I didn't actually get that added to this one, but yesterday's will work just fine. Sorry, we're seeing how the sausage gets made here. Because I'm seeing folks in the chat. I'm lifting up Chris. I'm shouting out Chris for his work, his unseen work on the map. But I'd like for you too, just to see if is there somebody that you can shout out from the last couple of days, someone that you've met, that you've made a connection with, or an idea, a thought, a connection that you've made that's still resonating with you here today. Any highlights from yesterday? We had an incredible, and my palms are still sweating, discussion about the future of AI and ed tech from that one, which I haven't watched the video yet. I'm sure it's great. We had an incredible conversation in the afternoon with Great Plains Action Society youth. And then between those, Dr. Emma McMain's critical SEL workshop. So much there. So yeah, keep the positivity going, shouting people out there. What are your aha moments? And then let's root ourselves again in those principles of emergent strategy brought to us by Adrienne Marie Brown. I'm not sure where I'm at here today. Maybe I'm leaning more into there's always enough time for the right work, given that we're coming to the end of our 3 days together. And I'm thinking, man, I want to just capture this energy, put it in a bottle, and bring it with me into the school year as we continue to work with teachers and schools. But just knowing sometimes this is slow. You're not going to have all the answers right away. Maybe that's something that we can go through. Awesome. I'm seeing shout outs to Mel at What School Could Be and Leah Kelly. Oh, I've loved those breakout rooms. Typically, I'm pretty skittish of them because it's hard to socialize, but I love the small groups. Mary Beth Hertz, being a Luddite in 2025. Check out the Discord for more about that idea. Awesome. Julie, always wonderful and deeply informative to hear from students about their experiences. Oh, I told Chris and Cassie yesterday, it was all I could do if you were in that session to gather myself together and get through it. It was very, very emotional. Shout out to Stimpunks from Jen for sharing everything in the chat. That's great. Oh my gosh. Oh, and thanks, Jane, for a shout out for me, of course. Oh, and more shout outs for me. Anybody else? Shout outs for me while we're at it? Drop them in the chat. I love it. Okay. Well, before we get started with our group today here and set the stage for the conversation to come, of course, I got to thank some of the folks that made this possible. Of course, you all as participants, our donors, and the sponsors who have donated directly to make Conference to Restore Humanity happen. I'm talking, of course, about Learning Inspire Ed, led by Mike Nicholson. It's a forward-thinking education consulting agency committed to learning and supporting the development of student agency, with a focus on moving away from constraints and moving toward possibilities. Learning Inspire Ed helps school districts create the best conditions for students to lead their own learning. Mike works with districts across the United States, from Colorado to Virginia, from Florida to Vermont, in this game-changing work. Teacher-Powered Schools launched in 2014 as an initiative to highlight teacher-powered initiatives and support teacher teams in securing collective autonomy to design and run their own schools. It's a collaborative of people working to create student-centered learning environments, build capacity of educator teams, and advocate for teacher-powered opportunities. In addition to their website, check out their upcoming conference this October in Ypsilanti, Michigan, where I believe HRP will also be presenting a workshop. So-called Moran Partners. Pam Moran has been around here. It's been incredible to have her as a participant this week. Is one of the leaders there alongside Ira Sokol. They work with educator teams of all shapes and sizes to develop schools that support children as they grow into creative, inventive, empathetic, and collaborative lifelong learners in their communities and economy and our world for the next 100 years. Their innovative workshop model helps students use portrait of a learner models to implement practices to help learners thrive in life, not just in school. And the Lab for New Teaching is a new organization offering professional learning for educators that's affordable, progressive, and hopeful. The Lab creates spaces where collective expertise becomes curriculum, empowering educators through collaborative reflection, dialogue, and frameworks that foster human connection in education. Another supporter of ours is KMS Intercultural Education, a consultancy firm that develops capacity for bridging differences through a mutual understanding of our unique lived experiences. Through workshops, education on cultural frameworks, and coaching, KMS strives to build empathy and dialogue skills to better our communities. And you can learn more at kmsinterculturaled.com. What School Could Be highlights innovative work happening across the United States and abroad, with a focus on trusting and supporting educators for building schools that prepare young people to lead fulfilling lives in a future begging for higher order competencies. Their work includes podcasts, writings, and documentaries, including the soon-to-be-released film Multiple Choice, that answers the question, what if students saw college not as the only path, but one of many paths that lead to a life full of purpose? And of course, STEMpunks Foundation, dedicated to creating a more inclusive and equitable world for neurodivergent and disabled individuals. By challenging traditional systems and advocating for accessibility, STEMpunks promotes a supportive community that celebrates diversity and empowers people to thrive in their unique ways. Their innovative approach combines direct support with advocacy and education, driving change in both public perception and policy. And you can, of course, always find Ryan on the Discord. STEMpunks has their own Discord as well. And of course, you can connect with them at stempunks.org. Now we get into the meat of our conversation here today. 2025 has been a lot. We managed to hit peak unprecedented about 5 years ago, and yet somehow those hits keep coming too. Schools have taken a direct hit from divisive culture wars, a mental health crisis that the U.S. Surgeon General described as the crisis of our time, and a coordinated effort to undermine education funding and rights, all with students, parents, and teachers caught in that crossfire. And what's more, the communities and families we serve are disproportionately impacted by policies that exacerbate inequality and economic precarity, alienate and isolate our LGBTQ friends and family, and embolden racist immigration enforcement to make America fearful again. I take solace in comments yesterday from the Indigenous young people that represented Great Plains Action Society, who compared our current time to the false spring that we often get here in the Midwest. Now, if you're from a more gentle climate, typically around spring break, we get a taste of the summer to come before being buried one final time under winter's last gasp. It's depressing, it's defeating, it's maddening and inscrutable. Why? I thought we were done with this. But it's a sign that summer is coming. And I remain hopeful that we can make it through this storm. And we've got an incredible group of humans with us today to help us navigate it. And I'm joined by Maria Munro-Schuster, Lucket Kiche, Chanea Bond, and Will Richardson in that. And I thank you all for joining me here today. I will say here real quick, if you want to go ahead and look at the norms, folks in the audience, I think for today, we'll try to emphasize some voices that we haven't necessarily heard along the way. And just be sure to maybe keep the comments concise and be sure to end with a question for them as well. And I've asked each of our panelists here to not only introduce themselves, just explain a little bit about their role in education, but then answer that fundamental question. From your perspective, what is the most pressing issue facing education, schooling, teaching, or learning in 2025 and beyond? And I'll just start with who's closest on my screen here with Maria. Why don't you go ahead?
Oh, yay. I always love being put on the spot first. Thanks,
The
Nick.
luck of the draw.
Good morning, everyone. I feel so grateful to get to be here. I feel like just listening in yesterday, this is definitely my group of people, so I feel very invited in this space. Um, my name is Maria, and I am a former K through university educator. That's what I've done for the majority of my career. And now I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor as well. Um, I think my central path in life has always combined education and curiosity about humans, and that's probably because I've spent the majority of my life in some sort of educational environment and all of my life as a human. And so I find interest in asking those questions of how those two worlds intersect. And probably like many of you, I grew up in an educational environment where I felt dehumanized and from a very young age have felt passionate about doing something different. If that means dressing up as a moose to make a fool of myself, I've done that now too. So um, I uh, initially decided to look into the mental health world because as an English teacher, primarily in Montana, I was finding that most of the work I was reading from my students was, even though I might ask for something else, it was usually about their depression and anxiety and fears that they were having about the world. I felt like I was a counselor as a teacher reading their work. And so one year I finally decided to say, screw this curriculum. We're teaching a mental health curriculum this year in English class. And that was my start of my journey into becoming a licensed counselor. And now that I'm in that world, I've learned so much that I'm fortunate to be able to share with educators now about how to um, take care of themselves in classrooms while working with their students. And so this year I've been able to publish a book on mental health for educators, The Empathetic Classroom. And I feel like one of my main focuses in working with humans, either students, clients, anyone that I am able to work with, is working with people to get to know and understand the uniqueness and the power of their own story in life and be able to identify an authentic internal and external voice so that they have a sense of personal power. And I do believe from the students and clients I've worked with, what I see is that people are less likely to try to exert control and power over others when they feel a real sense of internal power. And so that's kind of been the work that I've been interested in for my career at this point. Um, my issue that I decided to focus on is very related to all of this, and it's kind of a big gray area, but a really interesting one to me, which is fear as a primary issue right now in education. Um, from an educator's perspective, asking the question, how can we work with our fear more constructively um, within our classrooms and within our school environments? And with our students, how can we help build understanding and even possibly reduce the existing state of fear that is in our students right now? I can tell you from all of the students I see in my practice, they're operating from a fear-based perspective right now, a fear-based part of their personality. And even the educators I work with, there's a lot of fear. And what that results in is more reactivity, so less choice over our actions and more just like biological reactiveness, seeking control and desiring to isolate ourselves. And so I'm kind of that's where I'm starting with my issue, which is how do we work with that a little bit differently?
Oh my goodness, Maria, so much to unpack there. Thank you. Luckett, you're just next to Maria on there in our little Brady Bunch square.
Oh
Go ahead.
man. Hi, I'm Lucket Kiche. My pronouns are he or they. I am a fifth grade teacher in Iowa City. I serve as a at-large equity director for Iowa City Pride. I also am a state delegate for the Iowa State Education Association Union. So strong union supporter here. And I believe that our one of the biggest, there's so many things wrong with education right now, obviously. We could be here forever, but I think like the most important thing that we are doing is the lack of humanization of our students and the people that are working with them. I think that our kids have always been at the center of what we do, and we make our decisions based off of what they want or need. And people have stepped away from this concept of actually listening to our youth and using that as a crutch to do better. Um, I think we're also facing just a lack of clarity of how to best support our students. Everybody is saying you should do this, that's the best thing, or you should do that, or get rid of this practice because it's not good anymore. And then you have people who are like leading education who are refusing to be flexible and leave old practices behind. One of my least favorite programs that is nationwide, most people use is PBIS, this positive behavioral institutional support system. And it's just based off of B.F. Skinner's studies on rats and pigeons on how to make uh, animals or people do things and positive and negative consequences. And as a teacher, I can see that it does not work for who we want it to work for. And so we've been leaving these many kids behind, and we're just stuck in this old concept, and people are just almost refusing to let that go, that this positive negative um, support system is the end all be all, and it doesn't work for a marginalized community. So I think that one of my biggest goals is to be a voice for those intersectionalities that I hold and other students hold, that can help whatever I need to do, support or whatever, blah, blah, blah. That's it.
Thanks, Luckett. Oh, I can't wait to come back to that too. And Shanae, you're just another one down on there. We're just going to go down the block.
Hi, I'm Chanea Bond. I am an English teacher, a high school English teacher. I also am teaching an adjunct professor at a community college that is affiliated with my school district. I've been doing this for 10 years. And so when we got this homework, I made like a list. I started out that day and I made a list, and it was like 37 things exactly. And so then I like put in real teacher fashion, I put the things in like columns, and it's like, okay, these all have the similarities. And then I tried to see what the similarities between all of the columns were. And so what I came down to about an hour ago is I think that the two things that I think are most pressing, and I think that this kind of encompasses everything that's been said so far, is like working against authoritarianism and resisting the easy wins of adopting authoritarianism in our classrooms and ourselves, in our communities, and with our students, in community with our students. And then the thing that, as I'm starting my doctoral journey this fall, and the what I'm noticing that's another huge issue that to complement the resisting authoritarianism is the absence of joy, and not just in our classrooms, but in like life, you know. I'm seeing a lot of teachers who are burning out simply because there is no place for the totality of their identities, and there's no place for joy. And so if I'm going to work for like a medium salary, then why am I also going home and spending hours and hours planning? So finding ways to resist authoritarianism, and joy, I guess, as a resistance to that.
Oh my goodness. So true. And Will, I don't know if it's sorted alphabetically by panelists or what, but Will Richardson, go ahead.
Well, first of all, thanks, Nick, and thanks, Chris, for inviting me on this panel. This is obviously a topic that we could spend weeks on, I think, if not months. And I really appreciate what the others have said already. I, too, was a high school English teacher, so I think that makes three of us. I taught for about 20 years and then was an administrator for 3 years. And I left that job to go around and speak and help do workshops around technologies, early web technologies, when it was still when social media was still a good thing. And now things have turned a bit, obviously, with just a lot of the complexities that have come along with it. But pretty much have been working with schools in over 25 different countries, and had the privilege of meeting tons of people, many of whom are on this call. I'm really excited to see how many people I know here. That's I think it's a great thing, this community that is out there that I think is really starting to talk about some of the fundamental issues about education. And I think that's kind of where I'm going to take my part of that answer to the question. I'm going to get, I think, a little more meta about it, because I think in many cases we're treating symptoms and not the problem. And there are a lot of symptoms of what's wrong in education, but I think there are some underlying fundamental problems that we're facing right now. I'll be a little self-serving and put in the chat a link to a manifesto that I wrote earlier this year that kind of describes what I think those problems are. But just to be pretty concise about it, I really think that what we're facing now is a very dangerous unwillingness on the part of schools and educators to face the realities of the world and to begin to fundamentally rethink the value proposition that we offer. I think if we could get really down to the crux of it right now, as a world, we are out of relationship with one another. We're out of relationship with all the other living things on the planet. And I think that fact filters down into a lot of the challenges and issues that we find ourselves dealing with in schools, whether that's mental health, whether it's burnout, whether it's authoritarianism, whether it's climate. All of those things I think stem from the fact that at its core, our challenge is to try to do some relational repair. And I almost think that if schools are to continue, I really feel like that is the work. I sent out a newsletter today, and I'll just pull a sentence from it that I think also captures where I'm at in terms of my headspace. And I just wrote, right now, schools are teaching kids to succeed in the very systems that are devouring the planet, fueling inequity and separation, and numbing their ability to notice any of that. And I think we have to own that. We don't own that right now. We are still committed to these narratives that we know are doing harm. We're committed to narratives about classroom practice that we know are antithetical to the way that children learn best. And we are simply denying that the predicament that we're in is going to be very, very difficult for all of us to navigate, much less our kids. So to me, the biggest issue is just acknowledging that we're not acknowledging that, and that we continue to try to tweak systems and practices that we know in our hearts as educators are not serving children, have never really served children, but now especially are becoming increasingly irrelevant, given the challenges, complexities that we're in right now.
Oh man, we've got Such an awesome collection of perspectives, right? Kind of standing around the object that is education and seeing it from all sorts of different slices. I want to come real quick to Lucket and Chanea. I'm bringing all the things together, but I'm really curious. Like I'm hearing Maria talk about fear, you know, in her practice, what she sees as one of the biggest issues, perhaps not just in education, but one that can be addressed both within and without. Then hearing Chanea talk about the absence of joy and sort of this idea of joy as resistance. And frankly, it seems like fear and joy are like those polar opposites, right? Like the opposite of fear is joy and the opposite of joy is fear. And then Luckett, I'm thinking too about our context in Iowa, in you know so-called red states like ours, as though it's some unchangeable phenomenon, where like policies directly target education practices that attempt to embrace humanity and inclusion and diversity and all those other parts of living in a pluralistic society that then Will is saying, right, are completely out of step, right, with the shape and the structure and the function of the world. So I'm so grateful that we get to do all this. Come into Luckett and Chanea, and you'll have to fight over who can answer first, I suppose. In your classroom practice, right, what does it look like to be in a dehumanizing system and to embrace humanity and humanizing practices? What do you do? How do you try to make space for those things?
Oh my gosh, so the best thing about being a teacher is that you get to learn something new every single year. You're just like constant learning, and no year is the same. And I'm always like evolving in my practice and trying to listen more. And so this year, um, I just listen to the kids, and sometimes I stop what we have to do and we talk for an hour or 2 hours, and the kids tell me what their grievances are with me or with other people, and then we have a conversation and then we move on. I think one of the most powerful things this year that happened to me was like towards the end of the year, and I had some kids who, there's always, you can not all kids are going to like you. There's always going to be the kid who talks about you behind your back and says whatever. So, I was thinking about this like situation and going through and like, because there's always the kids that are going to tell you that so and so said this about you behind your back. And, they're like, ooh, I want to know who's there. Let me know when you talk to them. Because, they're thinking I'm going to go off and do this like horrible, like everybody's in trouble. And, at first I was like, oh, I'm a little upset. Why are these kids talking about me behind my back? And then as like the day went on, I was reflexive about it, I would say, if we're using the vocabulary from yesterday. And I decided to like sit and say, let's have this conversation and let's all talk about what's going on. What are your grievances with me? What did I do to piss you off today? And they all told me, and instead of like, because they thought, I was like, this is your opportunity, tell me. You're not going to get in trouble if you tell me right now everything that you said or whatever throughout the whole year, something you want to admit. This is your time. And this, like, a majority of the class came clean, even things that I had no idea was on the table. They were like, I'm really sorry. One day you came in and you were telling kids to move, and I called you, I thought I called you lazy because you couldn't get up, but I was doing small groups at the time, so I couldn't get up. I was talking to, but she came back and I had no idea. So she said she had called me lazy and fat over there in the corner, but she decided to come clean at this time because I had given her the opportunity to just be like, people make mistakes and it's okay to say sorry. And every time that I upset you, I'm so sorry that I did that to you. And just being like, I don't have to be rude and mean about this, but I can just show them that like you can say something bad about me, and instead of me going off and being rude to you, like I can take it as a human and be like, you know what, let me just change how I'm going to respond to this. And this is like the end of the school year. So like I felt like I could have had this conversation with them um towards the beginning. And it wasn't our first conversation, but just like stopping the curriculum, I would say, to listen to them, just to listen to what they have to say is just so profound, and you can't take anything away from that.
How about you, Chanea? What does that look like in your context?
I'm gonna say something, and it's gonna sound triggering to anyone who's ever sat through a professional development. So I'm like, this is the warning. The thing that has it's remembering my why. I know. I'm sorry. But like not in a I went to a professional development and somebody who was attempting to like manipulate my thought process or get me to do something is asking me to remember my why, but sitting with myself as a person who has anxiety and depression and has ADHD and shows up in a classroom with students who have these like various levels of um, social and emotional regulation, right? Remembering that I became an educator because it felt like a human right, a civil right, and a huge equity issue. I live from Texas, by the way. So every time Text Ledge comes out with some new, you can't read books, or you can't say gay, or you can't, to go off script or off curriculum. For me, it goes back to why are you doing this work? And so Nick and I talked pretty extensively about this, but in my classroom, I'm a reading and writing teacher. I taught composition for the first time this school year, and it looked like slowing the hell down and really focusing on the pieces of my curriculum and the end goal of what we were looking for, and ensuring that there was a focus on my students' humanity. And so every writing assignment, the end is a reflection about how do you show up here? What is it that you are doing? And although maybe I didn't assign the text that was banned, my student who is trans, or my student who is researching, women's liberation because she chose the topic, right? Um, they're still doing that work of working through these complicated social systems. And so, yeah, I think it's just really refocusing what my job is, and and I think that for me, the thing that kind of gets me through is that I am only 10 years in. I'm not really that close to retirement, if I can, because I'm a millennial and what is retirement? But when I'm unable to do the work that is my why, then I just won't be a teacher anymore.
Can I jump back in on that? And I so totally agree with that. I think that my why is also encompasses in what I do every day. And I didn't become a teacher for you to tell me that I can't teach kids about who they are. And so one of my biggest things is, yeah, every day I might show you, you're in my room, you're going to see people who you might not see in other classrooms. And if it's I have had two posters in my room that were supposed to be taken down, and I took them down, but I just put them on the inside of my cupboard. So like if my cupboard happens to be open, you might still see these flags. Sorry. Like, and if I'm having a conversation about the truth, I'm going to tell you what it is. And I think it's my obligation as a teacher to teach you what the truth is. And then there's no legislation or bill that is going to stop me from saying what I need to say to an extent. And if I can't physically say it, I'm going to tell you where to get it.
Oh, that's some excellent creative non-compliance there too, because even if it doesn't come out of your mouth, if you say, "Hey, why don't you just Google this, that, or the other thing on your Chromebook real quick, and you'll figure that out." That's I love that, and that really speaks to like I don't know, there is like that sense of joy and community in the resistance too, to actually be creative instead of just beating into the system or giving in and compromising, yourself in this. I want to do a swing here through Maria's perspective, and we'll end on that meta again if we could, because Maria, you're experiencing this now in your role as an LCPC, with sort of the externalities perhaps of school, like the fallout of these systems. How have you seen these, the issues that you're speaking to expressed in the clients that you're working with now in your current role?
Yeah, I first want to just reflect on what I just heard too, from both Lucket and Chanea. What I heard there was just that they decentered themselves in their classrooms, and yet they still showed up as who they are. And that's hard work in some ways. I think we have to untrain ourselves from what we were raised to think school was. And so it's cool to hear, educators doing that. And yet it still feels like, it brings up things in our nervous systems when we show up as ourselves at school, especially right now. And so, a question I'm kind of grappling with as I hear them talk is like, why are educators afraid to change? Like, why are they afraid to show up as themselves in their classrooms? And so, one thing that I can bring in that I hear anecdotally across the board from um, clients of all ages, and the beauty of getting to sit in this space versus my classroom right now is I feel like I'm getting those deeper inner thoughts that they were afraid to even tell me as their teacher because they were afraid of judgment still, even though I tried to be the least judgmental person, right? I'd say like, hey, I accept you as you are. It's incredible when you have this container and you say, okay, um, be as wild as you want here. Let your brain flow freely, right? And what I hear is the sticking point I get with so many people is that they're afraid of experiencing deep sadness and grief. And the change process requires people to let go of old ideas, and that brings up strong feelings of grief. And rather than feeling that, most people would rather stay in feelings of anger, which feels safer. And that anger results in blame. And the blame either is towards themselves, so they internalize it, or it's towards others and they blame other people. Um, and so one of the outcomes I'm seeing in my practice now is students coming in and self-blaming or externally blaming, and not feeling like they have anywhere to go with that.
And that anger then feeds back into fear, which, I don't want to get all Yoda on us here, but we know where that stuff ends up. Chanea, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Maria, that was so, like everything that you said is so spot on. And I'm working with new teachers and teacher educators, and I think you're right. And I think that's something else that is missing is like the absence of frameworks and models for that work. And so I've been sitting with pre-service teachers the last few weeks, and they are miffed when I say things like, yeah, I just kind of cried in my class when I read this poem, and my students like showed up for me in this really beautiful way. And then we debriefed. They were like, how? And I'm like, I did, I don't know, I just did. And I realized that like I had a model of a teacher who did that, but there are so many contexts in which teachers and students are living where there is no adult or no person who has gotten to a point where they feel extremely comfortable in themselves, and which makes them extremely comfortable decentering themselves. And so like I read a poem to my class this morning. It was Lucille Clifton's Come Celebrate With Me, and it's always this idea of like I made it up, and we are like making up frameworks to do the work that really requires us to be like self-actualized in a way where we can like take ourselves out of the spotlight. But it feels so rare in this community, this conversation right now. Thank you for naming that. That's all.
I appreciate that back and forth. I wanted to just bring it around to Will here then, because I'm thinking at that meta level, that systemic level, Again, I think of like policies or even purpose, philosophy, right? Our approaches to education. To borrow a phrase from our friends at Open Way Learning, they talk a lot about those big rocks that need to be moved in your practice, and not only identifying them, but then working to actually move those rocks. I recommend everybody get that manifesto from Will's website that we posted on here and give it a read through there. But Will, if you could, what are those big rocks that need to be moved to make this system sustainable? So that way, right, what we're hearing from Lucket and Chanea are not, done, in secret, in hushed tones, these humanizing practices. How do we actually make space to make these sustainable, humanize, and to accomplish its purpose?
Is an acceptable answer. I don't know.
No, because that's why we're here today.
Well, let me just pick
Yeah,
up on
walk us
something.
through it.
First of all, let me just pick up on something that Maria said that I think is really important. The idea, and this has been something that has been on my mind since I read a book by Robert Evans that's about 20 years old, and it's called something like The Reality Behind School Change or something like that. Maybe someone can find it really fast. But in here, he makes the point that what we don't do in the change process is grieve. And if we don't grieve, then we don't fully embody that change. We don't fully, because it changes us, right? It's not when we ask people to change in schools, what we are saying to them is what you have valued yourself as being really good at now has to shift, and you have to recreate your value in a different way, right? And we don't give people opportunities, spaces, conditions to really feel that sadness and that grief. And I do think that that's just really, really important. And it's missing from the process. I also think, however, that, and this is held true in the last 15, 16 years that I've been working with schools and teachers. What's really interesting is when I was working with Homa Tavengard, the Big Questions Institute too, I mean, we used to ask, like big questions. And pretty much when we asked people what their big questions are, I would say about 75% of them always started with how. How do we do this? How do we change this? How do I, fill in the blank? And we can fill in the blank with maybe 20 things that we've already talked about today, right? What I've come to believe is that, and there are other people, Peter Block has a book called, The Answer to How is Yes. And what I've come to believe is that we don't spend enough time really just sitting with, another book that's had a huge influence on me in the last year is Hospicing Modernity by Vanessa Andreotti. And she talks about the need for us to sit with the shit and just sit with it instead of trying to fix it. And we have this fix it mentality in education that, again, I think prevents us from getting to the root causes of what our issues and challenges are. And if we can just sit with it and really unpack it and feel it and embody it, and then it gives us a better chance of fully understanding why so many of these challenges are facing us, not just in education, but in the world today, right? So I'm serious when I say I don't know, right, how to fix these things. And I'm less inclined to even worry about it at this point, because I don't think that that's an even relevant conversation to have until we've really figured out the what, like what is actually happening here, and what are all of the things that are impacting the challenges that we face. And to me, that's a very difficult place to sit, right? But it's with that acknowledgement that I think we become more enlightened in terms of what's the most relevant, healthy, caring path forward that really speaks to this moment that we're in, instead of tries to fix a whole bunch of things that have been in education for centuries that haven't been fixed yet and likely aren't going to get fixed anytime soon. And I know that sounds kind of, I don't know if it's nihilist or whatever, but I think we have to change the way that we approach a lot of these conversations, to be honest with you. And I think it goes back in large measure to the idea that this is about our relationships. Our relationships with one another, our relationships with all other living things on the planet, which schools have done a great job of separating us from both of those things, by the way. And until we kind of fundamentally think about that impact, I think it's going to be hard to, quote unquote, fix any of this.
If I could bounce this back to you, Will, here too, just speaking to, right, in order to ever get to an answer, we have to ask the right questions. We have to have better conversations. And I wrote down here that maybe the question is, what is the what? Or what would your recommendation be then for having the better conversation? If I'm thinking 2 steps down the chain and you're saying, hold up, let's back it up to the fundamentals, what would you say we start with instead?
Let me steal from Vanessa Andreotti's Hospicing Modernity. And I think the question is, what are we denying? What are we in denial about? And the 4 that she lays out are, we're in denial about how bad things really are. We're in denial about how we are complicit in the violence and harm. We're in denial about how separate we are. And the 4th one's going to escape me right now. But I mean, it's, you know what I mean? It's like, these are kind of the fundamental questions that I think we have to address. We have to really look at our own practice in the world, and just understand how much we just take for granted. Like, I use this example all the time, but all of us have a smartphone. I'm pretty sure everyone has a phone here, but I'm not sure how many of us have really begun to take a look at the violence that has gone into bringing this product to our pockets. And not just violence on people, but violence on the planet. And I mean, that's not to say that we got to stop buying smartphones, but it is to say we have to own that, and we have to use that as a lens for the way we operate in the world, right? And kids have no context for that at all, because schools will not talk about that. And so I get obviously pretty wound up about this, and I'll take a deep breath. But I think that, we are not seeing clearly in education what's happening in the world and our own complicity in what's happening. And until we do that, we're not going to fix much of any of this, unfortunately.
And I'd love to also just bounce that back to see, what is that? Forgive if you hear Wally barking in the background at our neighbor mowing their yard, but bounce that back to the classroom level. Maria, perhaps to your context as well. Either how are you seeing those things manifest, right? Like in unmet grief, right? Just either generational, it's acute, right? Just brought on by what's happening right now, bringing up so many unresolved issues to the forefront, particularly, in the United States, a relationship to its people and the world. How have you seen that both manifest in, students and families? And I don't know how do you address that on the ground, in real time?
I wrote about this a little bit on Blue Sky, but after the election, I had this really beautiful, really wonderful second period class. They were my favorite group of people. There were 10 of them. And after the election, so literally, I think I took took the 5th off. And so when I came back on the 6th, there were ruptures. And what I've noticed from that tiny class onward is like this fracturing of community and this fracturing of solidarity, specifically among marginalized groups. And that has been devastating to witness, because our community is extremely diverse, and it was hard as an educator of students who can vote to continue to build on a community that had ruptured. And I'm still figuring my path through that. But that was just, and I was teaching in 2016 when Trump was elected in a small town called Wichita Falls, Texas. So I feel like I have had kind of a front row seat to the way that these harms show up in the classroom. But I think that for me, that was just such a moment of clarity about how, I had queer students and Latino students and Black students who kind of were treated into this level of tribalism for protection. And as an English teacher, it was just really, really painful because one of our big lofty goals is, oh my gosh, we're teaching about a collective humanity. And I did not at that point in time have the skills to address what it looked like for my queer students to feel unsafe with students who had actively, supported someone who is a bigot. I mean, for lack of a better word. And so I'm working through that. I'm working through that actively. Every year it changes. But for that class in particular, I had to kind of go back to the basics. And so our writing and our sharing, I had to be very strategic and judicious about what I asked vulnerable and marginalized students to put on the table. And I had to be very strategic about the type of safe space that I had crafted. Um, and it went back to kind of a rule. I think the only rule I have in my class is that like we do not disparage or deny anybody's humanity. It is not an arguing point. It is never a talking point. And I had to kind of go back to that. And then I had to kind of revitalize my curriculum with texts that didn't like obviously a little bit indoctrination, right? I'm trying, but I mean it's not super effective. But a reminder of why reading and writing and telling stories are a can be a part of work that leads to anti-oppression and anti-authoritarianism. But yeah, thank you for asking that question. It's really hard.
How about Lucket or Maria in either of those contexts?
Yeah, in my classroom, this is my first year teaching fifth grade. So I the curriculum is slavery, and the Revolutionary War. It's all the like the meaty, most important history things that they need to know in order to, it's about building our democracy, and what happened during these times that was inhumane to the people. And so I think that for me, it's just important to show them the truth and to show them kids their age doing remarkable work at these times so that they can feel like a lens into, or they can see that you don't have to be young to make change, or like making change and being young doesn't have to, like hurt you. I think that, yeah, fear mongering is at the top of a topic debate for a lot of people right now, and people are just scared to offend other people. And so they're offend, like we were talking about, they're just scared to grieve and be vulnerable. And so rather than being afraid of these conversations, they're just gonna stick to the injustices and not talk about it. I think uh yeah, basically just fulfilling and filling in the gaps of education where the curriculum doesn't have, and showing them real things that they don't talk about is so crucial. But I'm just one person, so that's only my group of kids every year, and I can't say that for everybody else. So it really is hard to listen to politics and how other people feel about humans, and then be a teacher and try to combat that while respecting their family's beliefs and knowledge. And like Chanea said, we're not compromising with humanity. Like, if it's not up for a debate. And I try to push that along with my students as well. So thank you for saying that.
Oh, go ahead, Chanea.
Go ahead. Oh, Chanea, go ahead.
Yeah. I'm so sorry. I wanted to go, um, something that was important to me, um, as a teacher, but also as a teacher leader, is also providing space for my colleagues. I know that we do a lot of talking about like students and their humanity and how we show up for them as we should. But I have queer colleagues, I have non-binary colleagues, I have Black and brown colleagues who were struggling and who are, you know, some of my favorite people on the planet work in my department, and they are 23, 24, 25. It was maybe the first election that they voted in Texas, and it was painful for them to be in, you know, the world for a while, but also painful for them to have to navigate those conversations with students. And so something that I told them, and I told my principal, is that we have to change. There are some teachers who are not ready to meet the moment to have those conversations in class, and we have to provide space for those teachers to do some sort of healing work internally before we expect them to lead conversations about equity and access and trauma and pain and depression for students. And so I think that goes back to Will's point about like our internal humanity and all of the ways that our systems are broken and hurting us. But I think it's so important if you have some sort of contact with teachers who are also from marginalized groups, that you, before we expect them to do the heavy lifting of engaging in these conversations, we affirm their humanity and provide space for them to mourn and to grieve. Because I think that the fracturing in my class was really, really hard, but seeing my younger colleagues in their grief and sitting with that, and then expecting them to go in and teach, you know, Land of the Slaughter or like it was rough. It was really, really hard. And for me, it was, I had to go and find some, I had to go to therapy myself, which everyone should if you have the opportunity. But I also had to, you know, talk about how to be a responsible leader that acknowledges the humanity of the adults in the room that we expect to do the work of acknowledging our students.
Yeah, it's such a great point. And I think we're so fortunate to have Maria's perspective on this because as we were saying at the top, she literally has wrote the book about that, about sort of bridging the gap between, you know, those tools that are, I guess, like good for the goose, good for the gander kind of thing. You know, if it's going to work in this therapeutic context, here's perhaps how teachers can begin to address that. And that is definitely, Maria, what I want you to speak to here, if you could, just like where is a great starting point? You cover so much ground in your book. What's a great starting point for teachers who say, oh no,
Yeah.
I'm seeing these conversations coming, or I need to have those. I'm not ready personally. I got to get my own house in order. What do you kind of say about that?
Yeah, and I do want to emphasize what Chanea is saying there, that it's so important to understand and have awareness of where you're at. And I always say, like, if you can't feel your own hands, if you can't if you can't feel your own breath, like maybe you shouldn't be like addressing some of these big things. Like, get into your own body first and find your own sense of regulation. And that doesn't mean you always have to be calm about things. You know, I think people think of, you know, therapeutic environments as it's just all kind of placid and we're compassionate all the time. Like sometimes we're pissed and sometimes that's important. And sometimes it's important to, you know, to be human with our students in those ways too, that, you know, conflict exists in the world. It is real. Sometimes we need to show how that should be done well, but and differences and exploring differences, but that's complex. And recognizing that as much as it would be cool if we all had family therapy training in working with our students, like that's how I see my past classroom discussions now. Is like that was almost a form of like family therapy. It was this experience of getting people to like really see each other across the room and hear what the other person said. And we're not all in a place to do that. So one thing that I have been able to at least suggest to educators, and again, this is like, if this doesn't work for you, like, don't worry about it, don't do it, right? But something I've found really helpful in learning more about like how my nervous system shows up in classroom environments is knowing what your own personal cues of safety and danger are. And we all have a unique setup of cues of safety and danger because of our past histories. And so what you feel like is dangerous is not necessarily going to be dangerous to someone else. And so you can look for these cues of safety and danger at different levels. So one is within yourself. Like, what do you notice within yourself that you feel tightness or you feel relaxed? What within yourself feels dangerous? And then the next level is within your relationships. So what cues do you notice in people you're in direct relationship with? Is it, the way that they look at you when you talk to them? Is it the way that their posture is? And then the next level is cues of safety and danger in your immediate environment. So knowing environmentally what's affecting you. Is it, the way the lights are in the room? Is it the slam of the door? Is it, the way that your whole school feels is actually a cue of danger, and you're walking into that every single day, and your nervous system is saying fight or flight, as soon as I walk in that door. And then finally, cues of safety and danger in the wider world, and just recognizing how our nervous system is interpreting all of this information constantly before our brain even processes what's going on. So we are biologically choosing to either connect with people or disconnect in a moment's time before we've even had any sort of executive functioning to think about how we feel about it. So I always say, start to notice, where do you shut down? Where do you get anxious? And where do you feel calm? And what are the stories attached to each of those states? And are those stories accurate still for where you're at today?
I think that's so helpful and such a good intro to the kinds of things I think that teachers can find when they do get that book and incorporate it into their work this spring. Just because I think, again, if we're all sort of naming this as a real fundamental issue that teachers and students, communities alike need to work on, I think a lot of people are going to be lost in the woods, I suppose, because they think, oh, well, I'm only trained as an English teacher. My bachelor's is in math. I don't know how to be trauma informed. There's a lot of resources. A lot of them are in this chat, in fact, about how to start centering yourself in that approach. And I love the flow that we've gotten going on in this conversation, bouncing between these perspectives. And I want to bring it back to Will with a little bit of a challenge, because I saw Don DeLand had put in here too. Oh shoot, I got to scroll all the way back up through the ever flowing stream that is our system here. Because what almost like in our conversation about AI yesterday, like I'm not quite there yet to give up the idea of a humanizing technological counterinsurgency, right? Like I don't know if I'm quite there yet. In the same way that I'm not quite at the point where I think the education system is immovable or like connected intractably, to evil processes and connections, which are undoubtedly there. But Don challenges maybe our belief that the system is too monolithic for us to change it. Does that represent well what you're saying, Will, or is it recognizing that schools and education are connected to this and that we have agency in changing that system? What would you think about that?
Well, first of all, let me just hit on again just a little piece of the previous conversation. We had talked before before we started the session of Ozzy Osbourne's passing, but I think the more important passing was of a woman named Joanna Macy, who wrote a book called Active Hope. And it's a really, really important text on how we kind of face what's going on right now, and how we take care of ourselves. Because I think a lot of this is going to be about how we take care of ourselves. And that's what a lot of this conversation is already. So I would invite people to maybe check that out. And there's also a great podcast. She called it The Great Turning. And there's a number of podcast episodes that you can check into on that too. Just some more stuff to read. I know people were saying in the chat there's way too much to read, and yeah, there is. Okay, here we go. And I don't know how else to say it. I do not think schools can change. Full stop. I don't think they can change. I think that if we really want change in the way that we educate young people, it's going to have to come on the fringes from new emerging models, structures. I don't even want to say systems as much as I think it's more about relations. The narrative that schools are built upon runs so deeply through all of us that to fundamentally try to change the experience of school for children, I don't think is possible. In terms of taking traditional schools and turning them into something very, very different. I only know of one school that's made headway in that, to be honest, like serious change that lasts type of thing. And it took them 12 years, had a leader that stuck around, was extremely visionary. Most of what I see that speaks to overcoming many of the challenges that we talked about today were built for it. They were built for a different way of thinking about pedagogy. They were built for a different vision and mission for the world. And some of those schools are really thriving. And that's where I find my hope, actually. Now, I totally understand that that's a hard thing to say in a room full of educators, many of whom are in schools right now and who want change to happen. But again, I'm not going to apologize for it. I think it's a reality. And it speaks to this one framing that I've been using lately too with the workshops that I'm doing, and that is that there is kind of this three stage process to this, if you will. It's kind of like the pre-tragic stage is when we kind of think things are going to be okay. We know that they're kind of tough right now, but we can fix them. It's all good. At some point, we'll figure it out. And then there's the tragic phase where we kind of just kind of go, crap, it's broken and it's not going to get fixed. And you grieve in that process, but then you come out of that in what is called the post-tragic stage. And in the post-tragic stage, you acknowledge the breakage, you acknowledge the mess that we're in, but then at least you have some clarity as to where the work is now, right? Like, what is the good work to do right now? And I do really appreciate what others have already said about taking care of children. That's the work right now, right? How do we take care of kids? That is the most important thing, and ourselves, by the way. That's the most important work that there is. How do we help kids understand that they are not separate from the world outside of the classroom, that they are an integral part of life, right? That's the work right now. And so if we're going to continue to try to figure out how to fix the curriculum problem, how to fix the discipline problem, how to fix the money problem, how to fix the fill in the blank problem, again, I just think we're not going to. And these systems are so intractable. And now, especially in the United States, the politics are so ridiculous that I think it's almost time misspent to try to fix. And I think the better spend of time is taking care of kids and taking care of one another, trying to rebuild those relationships that have been lost, but then also thinking really hard, what rises out of the ashes of this system? Because there are things that are emerging. And so, again, Vanessa Andreotti talks about how do we compost what isn't working, but how do we give a good birth to what we need for for the future of our kids and our civilization. So I know that's probably not a popular opinion, but
well, we're gonna wrestle with this because I think, and Chanel, just a second here on this, only because what I see though is it's kind of like a whether we like it or not thing, that teachers are going to go into classrooms and they have to act like we can, right? Even if the building is on fire. And I think we've had at least two educators in here speaking powerfully to that, even if it is on the fringes, it's not the mainstream. And I would just sort of stake my claim in like I don't think we're past that yet. But I'm also curious because I saw Chanea sort of give a +1 to that thought, Will, in the chat to say that I don't think schools can change either. And Chanea, I don't know if this is what you're going to speak to, but I'm really curious about what you've got to say about that.
Yeah, I don't think that schools can change because I don't think they want to. But what I do think can change is, I mean, Will kind of wrapped it up really nicely, is the way that we take care of ourselves and take care of our students. I think that my lens is like a Black feminist pedagogy, first and foremost, right? Birthed out of struggle, specifically the struggles of slavery and Reconstruction, and the ways in which specifically Black children are treated in this country. And I don't think that schools can change, but I also don't think that that's my job, right? I don't think that that's the job of the people who are in classrooms to attempt to change schools. I think it is our job, again, to work to change not even hearts and minds, right? But to work to change, to implement change in communities. I also think that something that happens is that schools can't change because they want to, but like we can start making incremental changes in communities. And I think that that's where I'm seeing the bulk of the work that's happening in and around my school. We are still beholden to the STAR test, which is an evil monster, and that's how that's how we're funded. That is how we're rated. All of these things, and so we can't stop doing that. But something that we're working through this year is how do we invest in and involve our community in a way where they too understand the stakes, but we also give back. And so, how does our school function not just as this place that is demoralizing and dehumanizing, but how can it also function as an arm and a leg of the community that we are beholden to? And I think that those are the questions that we have to start asking, right? Like, is change possible? Maybe, right, at a foundational level building up. But I think it's how do we make incremental changes that center the schools that we want to send our own children to is a question that we can address.
Yeah, I'd be curious. Lucket, Maria, just thoughts on that, right? I just don't see educators, right? Even if there's a landslide coming here, I don't see educators sort of giving up that hope or maybe shifting that hope. I'm not quite sure how to frame it, but I'm curious about you all's perspective on that.
I guess.
You go ahead,
Go
Maria.
ahead, Lucket. Oh,
Go ahead.
okay.
Sorry.
Oh, Zoom. I just hearing, what we're hearing today, I think is just giving. It's wonderful to know, as an educator, that we don't have to change schools, right? That's so much pressure and responsibility, and there's already so much on educators. And yet, what I'm hearing today from people who are leaders in education and leaders in their school is that they're changing the perception of what an educator should be, or this idea that we put on educators of what all they should handle. And I like this idea of getting to kind of just throw that script out a little bit. And what if, instead of trying to change schools, like one of the biggest things we can do is just give more leaders in schools like voice, to give permission to their co-educators to live more while they're teaching, to like be a part of a community, to take care of their bodies in a day, to actually just make this education experience more about living better rather than this idea of teaching and being an educator.
Yeah, Lucket, go ahead.
I don't think education can change either when it comes down to it. We can all have hopes and dreams and fairies in the sky, but that hasn't done much for us thus yet. I do think that it does have to go on a more base of a personal level of change. I love Audre Lorde, and she says our future survival is predicated upon our ability to relate within equality. So we have to be able to think about our problems as not just our problems. And my problems are your problems. And because we have been in that mentality of my problems are only my problems, that's why we are where we at. We are where we're at because people are not taking the time to truly relate and understand other people in their community. And I think that if we just focus on things like that, then perhaps in the future, with those hopes and dreams and butterflies, then we can shift to a little bit of a change. But I don't think that structurally on a big basis level that it's going to happen in our lifetime.
Yeah, to bounce this back to you then, Lucket, like what keeps you going back in the classroom then, right? If I'm hearing what Maria is saying about like, well, no single teacher should be expected to change a school system. Same for any other social or political movement, right? Like no individual can change the system by themselves. What keeps you going back into that, acknowledging the ills?
I think it goes back to the joy that I get when my kids understand a concept that I've been pounding in their heads for 5 weeks, and finally they're like, "Oh my God, yes, I get it," or the joy of listening to a conversation in the hallway about so and so, and they say, "Oh, Kiche says you shouldn't do this," little things like that, or just watching kids interact and knowing that I've taken however many days to instill as much as I can into them, and hopefully in the future they will succeed. And I also love seeing my old students on the street and being like, "What are you doing?" I just saw a kid yesterday at the mall, and he's about to go into his junior year, and he's going to go play baseball. All the schools are scouting him already, and like little things like that, like emails from kids that, "Oh, you were my favorite teacher, we had so much fun." Just the memories of just little victories bring me joy. And what also keeps me going back is, like I said earlier, is just I get to continue learning. I get to take the time every year to craft my profession and say, I'm going to do this year or not do this year. I'm going to be better here. And then I might not even be better in that area, but at least I tried, So just like the kids, their smiles, their joy, their success, their future. And I also like know that these kids are also our future. They're going to be running our government. They're going to be having all these jobs. We're not we don't want to just prepare them for the workforce, but we want to prepare them to be productive, productive citizens of our society, where they can make a difference for not only themselves but for other people. And it's hard to teach humility, to give somebody the opportunity to be selfless. And when you do teach that selflessness and then you witness it, it's a beautiful thing.
That's so powerfully said. And I think we have time, I think, uh I want to be able to land this plane and it unfortunately, if that means less audience participation for this one, I apologize. But I do want to end just hearing again from all of our incredible panelists here in the last 10 minutes, like bringing this thing home, like where and what they could be people. I know, again, my tabs are full of all of the resources and books and other people that I need to find and ideas I need to connect with. Where do you find inspiration? Where do you find a hope? Where do you get the will and the energy? Whether it's to be a happy warrior, in the face of, I don't know, in the face of calamity, or to find your pocket right? Find your people, find your niche, and be able to innovate and influence there. Or whether it's bridging the gap and organizing other people has been a big theme in the chat here too. This is why we organize conferences like this. And I think I'll come back around, bounce that to Will, and then we'll just kind of give everyone a chance to hear it. Like, Will, how do you keep going in your work? What inspiration do you find to keep going?
Well, two quick responses to that. One a little bit self-serving, but I mean the workshops
Yeah,
I've been doing. Well, the workshops I've been doing with people, the third cohort of which is starting in September, have been really inspirational. I mean, there are lots of people out there who are feeling these things and who need a safe space to just come and process and to really just try to sit with it, as I said. And so that's been where I've been getting my hope. There are people who are willing to face it and to, like I said, try to navigate it instead of try to fix it. And I think we need a lot more spaces like that. Second thing is, and this is kind of sideways, but I think it would be really interesting in these conversations if we asked the question, if nature was on this panel, what would it say? If two kids from the year 2050 were on this panel, how would they answer that question, right? And I think, again, too often we get stuck in our own heads and our own experiences. And I really believe that part of the way forward with this is to break out of the boxes in the ways that we kind of approach a lot of these conversations. I think it would be a really, really interesting part or opportunity to just, designate someone as representing nature here. What would nature say about what the challenges are for education in 2025? And what would those kids in 2050 say as they look back on this conversation that we're having right now? So just some food for thought.
Yeah. And I mentioned in the chat here, I mean, 2050, I don't know, to my brain, right? I still think that 10 years ago was the year 2000, but that 2050 mark, right? I mean, some of us may not be around here, but dang, I sure hope my kids are, right? I hope my kids are part of that 2050 cohort, and maybe we'll be around here in this panel to ask them ourselves. Let's keep it bouncing here. I don't know who wants to pick up that thread. Chanea, Maria, Lucket.
Sure. What keeps me going, I guess, is learning how to figure out what my version of joy in amidst the sadness and the anger that is so much of the world right now. My joy does not have to look like anybody else's. And, so figuring out like, what are the ways that I find, life more interesting or more quirky or more mysterious. And so that means sometimes really allowing myself to not be in these professional roles, right? Like to not be the educator for a moment, to not be the counselor for a moment, and like to get to be human too. So like, what are the things I want to spend my time on? Like, how do I get to be a little bit selfish in a good way and not feel, not feel guilt or shame about taking a little bit for ourselves sometimes to say like, yeah, what do I need here to keep going in this pretty, serious but important work? And then how can I share that with the people that I am working with? How do I share that with students and with teachers? Like how to find their own version of joy in a day and in order to have relationships that are, it sounds like everybody's kind of agreed on, is like the future of education is like continuing to really work into relationships. We need to be willing to be vulnerable in order to connect, in order to build trust, and to be able to sit in the discomfort that's so necessary that we all sit in right now. And so to do that, we have to be, we've got to have good sleep, we've got to have a good breakfast, like we've got to take care of ourselves. It sounds so simple, but it's so important.
I would also just like to add, like, I think I was reading in the chat, but teaching for me in a way is healing my inner child. all the education that I received that was negative, and negatively impacted my career path or my life. Want to make sure that other kids don't get that experience. So I feel like seeing the injustices, the racism, the homophobia, and all that from other teachers and other individuals in schools, it, I it's like my responsibility to make sure that I create a brave space for those who are in my care.
And now we're in dangerous territory because I think Chanea gets the last word. And if we know anything about Chanea, self-proclaimed professional yapper, Chanea Bond, bring us home.
Well, as no, I don't know. Sorry, I'm like taking really detailed notes and then we stopped talking and I was like, oh snap. Um, what is the question?
Oh, I was wondering what, right? Like in the face of all of the challenges, right, that we've outlined over the course of this conversation, the hills, the hurdles, the day-to-day, and the big systemic rocks, right? The intractable problems that education is linked with. How do you go to school and do the work, right? What inspires you, Chanea? Who are you reading or connecting with, or where do you get the energy to do what you do?
Um, I think that this is gonna sound wild. I am really good at it. I'm such a good teacher. Like I think that there's something about, and that sounds like silly in the face of all the things that we were talking about, but like when I can at the end of a semester see that a student has done a thing and I taught them to do that because I have like pedagogy and praxis and I've worked really, really hard and I can see that. Like I something about like me showing up as my full self in a classroom and doing a really good job, right? The data all proves it. That is like that's huge. But the thing that keeps me teaching and also like sitting on panels like this and talking to pre-service teachers is my like locating myself as a member of a lineage of specifically Black women and specifically Black queer people who have a past that has led me here and a future that it's my job to responsibly be a steward of and to bring forth. And so I just remembering my why, right? Locating myself as a part of this like very long story that cannot end with me.
That's such a powerful place, I think, to help land this conversation. Recognizing, our both our parts, our roles, our responsibilities, or our obligations to people who have come before us, and then the people who will come afterwards. I was thinking again of the conversation that we had with the wonderful young people from Great Plains Action Society, if you sat in that as well. And one of the questions that I was fortunate enough to ask is asking the parents, because there are a couple of the older folks who were joining the young people there too, who were parents, and just saying like, what was your experience like as Indigenous youth in your own time? And they're not elderly, they're in their 50s. And the experience that Sakowis, in particular, had recounted growing up in Winnipeg, in Canada, in a time before grappling with, the legacy of the boarding schools and everything else. You know, it was hell for her growing up as an Indigenous person. And even though, right, some of those same similar barriers, right, racism still exists, right? A lot of these different things, but the world her kids inhabit, she said, right, far better, than the one she inhabited as an Indigenous person in that. And perhaps there's a lesson there too, right, where that change doesn't have to look like a revolution. As a few people had mentioned in the chat, sometimes that survival, uh, getting a good sleep, getting breakfast, right, being there for one kid, that's a revolution, right? Sometimes survival, taking care of yourself, that's a revolutionary act when the system, is either trying to destroy or grind you down. Showing up with energy is resistance. Showing up with joy in work that right, might be fatally attached to other things, could be Resistance there too. Yeah, my goodness, Charles, good context there for the Canadian residential schools. So, my goodness, I'm so thrilled to have you all join us here today. I'll just put a quick reminder here. And Chris, I don't know if you have those slides at the ready, only because I'm confused about times, but I know we have Angela Stockman's workshop coming up here. There it is, 1:15 Eastern time. So again, we get a quick 45-minute working lunch. We're jumping in. I've really thought that the workshops in the afternoon have been great, big connections to these morning panel discussions. And I can't wait to see what Angela brings both from this and from the last 2 days of conversation to bring to bear on how we, right, steward the educational process through this ongoing active pedagogical documentation. And then, of course, for our evening things as well. But my goodness, everybody, just a huge thank you for bringing your perspectives, for sharing them with us, your time and energy. And we look forward to carrying the conversation over on the Discord. Thank you all so much.